Ron Branstner is the guest today. We have an important topic to talk about. Ron Branstner is a reporter with Catching Fire News. You can find his segments on J6ers and Islam and many other exciting topics at catchingfirenews.com. And he's most recently interviewed Brian Mock, who is one of the J6ers who spent a lot of time in jail. And Ron, your reporting on the J6ers and that whole series is very much appreciated. Everybody, please go catch the catchingfirenews.com. Excuse me. Today we're talking about something that seems to be surprising everyone. It's the Somali fraud in Minnesota. Everybody's incredibly surprised about it, Ron. What were we going to call this program and this series of programs, Ron?
What they're not telling you, or which?
Well, we told you so,
Yeah,
or
we
why are
told you
we not
so.
surprised, or we knew you, we tried to tell you years
Yeah,
ago, or what should
yeah,
be the
yeah.
title of
You know
this
what?
show?
There's so many metaphors, and then you could bring. We tried to tell you, but you didn't listen.
Or
I find it. I to hear somebody come up to me or the media saying, "Geez, we just discovered that there's $9 billion plus that's actually left the coffer for the Minnesota legislators through fraud," and we've been ringing, at least you and I have been ringing the bell throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota for years. I've been in front of crowds of 350, 400 people. We've done podcasts. We bring in speakers. We have notified everybody at least since 2014, 2015, and that this is happening. And suddenly, when the media or the auditors finally find out it's true, suddenly it's acting like it's just earth-shattering news. It's never been up before, but this has been going on for years.
as if it's suddenly true just because it's on the news, then everybody's saying, oh, it's got to be real. But
Yeah.
you knew about this years ago. You showed everybody the documentation. There were multiple, like you said, multiple events, multiple opportunities to discover. In some cases, we know there were legislators present in the audience when you came to the Rochester area. There were Minnesota legislators present in the audience, and they heard the presentations. And all of the, whether it was uh, the daycare fraud or Bob Carrillo came to Rochester as well, and Jim Newberger spoke in Rochester, and multiple speakers. You yourself were here many, many times, and suddenly everyone's surprised. I know we had a working title for this podcast. It could be, we'll come up with it again, but
Yeah.
what do you say, Ron? I mean, I'm dumbstruck. I
I,
can't
I
believe it.
think I think it's more shocking, and it plays off of um, the ignorance of what these politicians want to tell you, as though this just came out of osmosis. This just came up. We never knew about it, and the fact that you just said there were state representatives in the audience as I spoke and many others spoke, and for them to say this just came up out of nowhere under the Walz administration, Governor Walz of Minnesota, is just asinine. I mean, we the Somali fraud is just one piece of it, but we got the daycare fraud, the autism fraud, the feeding our futures fraud. First they said it was in the millions, then the billions. Now it's up to 9 billion. They said it's going to get to 18 billion. And you know, here's the deal. That's only what they're telling you. And they kind of
Yeah,
said, kind of like a leaky hose, they're going to give you a little bit of a time. But I'm telling you, when they start getting into um, translators, fraud, using
bingo.
translators, oh, that's going to be huge. And most of all, when they get into the marriage fraud, that is
Yes.
going to blow the minds out of people. Oh, they'll say, well, we never heard of that before. Yes, you have. I have warned you for years.
You were
I have
telling us
told
all
you
about
about
the
the marriage
people
fraud.
that were living in multiple countries and they were actually traveling back to other countries and bringing back another wife. I mean, we know that there were people who are going back to vacation for part of the year in another country. I mean, it's, now that they did a sampling of 1,000 cases under Operation Twin Shield. and they found that fully half of that sampling was fraudulent. And they found people, that Somali men married to spouses in other countries in Europe, also collecting benefits in European countries. So these men had multiple wives in more than one country. So it's not just Minnesota and the United States being defrauded. It's the good intentions of people who said, welcome the stranger, refugees are welcome here, on more than one continent being defrauded. So it's an international gameplay that went out. And um, part of that hesitation is, like you said, people need to pretend they're surprised because they want to start the fraud ticker from when Walz took over. But we know this predated Walz. It goes way back to Pawlenty. And we were going to start by talking about the origins of the fraud. I mean, to talk about the fraud ticker as noticed by suddenly the Center for the American Experiment, they just want to count the fraud under Tim Walz's watch. But the problem is that it's way earlier. So if they conveniently just begin with Tim Walz, the fraud number is going to be conveniently much smaller than if they go way back to Pawlenty, right? And another aspect of the fraud will be the tax credits awarded for hiring a refugee for X number of tax credit hours and then firing them at the end of that tax expiration and then hiring a new one to replace. So you could have an endless loop of refugees working in your company. I mean, that's a game on the American worker too, that the Department of Labor ought to be looking into. Slave labor conditions.
Let's we could talk and lump this all into a lot of big subjects, a lot of different categories. Let's just take one, okay, for now. Let's take the marriage fraud. Okay, people don't understand how the marriage fraud actually works. First of all, when the 9 or 10 volunteer agencies that were contracted with the federal government came to the United, or were working with the State Department, and they brought the refugees in from war-torn countries like Somalia, who are not under the classification of a refugee. They don't fit the proper definition of a refugee because they were fighting amongst themselves with no proper government. But when a refugee comes to the United States and they're landed here, they are not allowed to go back to the country of origin. And what we're seeing here with the refugee program is they're allowing them to go back to their country. In fact, Minnesota was paying the refugees from Somalia up to 3 months of their rent so they wouldn't lose their rentals here in Minnesota. They'd pay up to down to $75 so they wouldn't lose their rental units while they were traveling back, taking 3 months off of their work, traveling back to Somalia, using finding another wife, doing family reunification, getting that person pregnant, family reunification, bringing them back to the United States, putting that particular wife on some type of social welfare benefit, and then reduplicating that program over and over and over again. And our Minnesota state government was allowing them and subsidizing them to pay their rent, to pay their employers,
supplemental, yeah,
and all the supplemental incomes of welfare, SNAP, and all the means testing that they were getting with it. I mean, we're not even, when we talk about feeding our future autism fraud and many of the multiple frauds, we're not even getting into the biggest one, where how they're using money to use on family reunification. And then we go into the into it, as I stated, with the translating. I mean, every time they went into a doctor, even though they could speak English, they were using translators. And those translators were getting $75 to $150 for every 400 words. And so they would then use it over and over and over again. And the translators were making millions of dollars just off of that alone. The frauds are endless. And there's nobody that can tell anybody in Minnesota that this wasn't designed as to a redistribution of wealth, sending money from Minnesota primarily to a country that had a GDP of around 1.5 billion, and they were transmitting and through Hawala, transfer of money or remittance, of up to 9 billion so far and climbing. That's 8 to 9 times higher than their GDP. We were subsidizing 50% of Somalian residents were subsidized in a war-torn country from the state of Minnesota. And if that doesn't get your goat, because since the Somalians have come to Minnesota, our taxes on homeowner property taxes have went through the roof. Why? Because that remittance money that we're sending back overseas along with the fraud, it has to come from somewhere for your roads, highways, police departments, and schools. It comes out of that money being redistributed back into the economy. But if that money is being sent out overseas to countries like Somalia, Mexico, South America, well, we have to make up for that loss of money somewhere. So we go to the homeowners. And the homeowners have no idea that they're being fleeced by this particular program of a country and individuals that are stealing from us. So that's the marriage fraud in a whole. And when you talk about translations. So I'm not sure if you're aware. And what's really interesting about that, when they come over here, they give everybody the same birth date, 01, they pick a year. And they also have the same names, Muhammad, Muhammad Ali, Ali Muhammad. It just goes on and on. So it's very difficult to be able to track these individuals with same birth dates and same names. They go back home, they get pregnant, they come here, we admit them because of family reunification. It's a sad state of affairs, but it worked for them, and it's continued. I'm not even sure if we could correct that problem, to be honest with you. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It seems like Ilhan Omar at the top of the pile is one of the best examples of that, where she was clearly living with both her brother, who was her husband, and her actual husband at the same time, she was sharing the same residence and same address with both of them at the same time, and it's nothing fits. Why are you living with the person that you're married to? So she's one of the only female bigamists I know. And so the documents are kind of strange on her, but from the very top, and nothing seems to happen to her. I'd like to see some action taken on her right away. That just needs to be rectified. It's just time to do something about that.
Okay, so let's take what you're saying about Ilhan Omar and marrying her brother. You think this is an anomaly? This just came out of nowhere?
No.
Let's take the other female congressman out of Michigan, Rashida Tlaib. Well, she's a Muslim. She married her uncle. So now we've got two congresspersons, both Muslims, both women. One married her brother, one married her uncle. Is this a systemic problem, or is this a cultural problem, or is this just purely fraud in its making?
It's also that they know that we don't, they know that we're at the same time they're saying that we can't ask them their origin stories. While they tell us to respect diversity, we're not supposed to say, where are you from? And what is this Muhammad al-Muhammad name mean? Is this your father's, what's your origin story? Like what does it mean to say that you have 4 last names or 3 last names? I mean, we would have to explain that all the time. But it's just like you say, you're born January 1st. I ran into another January 1ster. I'm starting to call them January 1sters. You know how they call January 6ers? I'm just calling the Somalis January 1sters. It's kind of a nickname. It's like, I'm not even surprised anymore. And when I saw that on some lockdown records for a guy, I just thought, well, and they reprinted it in the news too. They said, "Oh, January 1st," and nobody even pointed it out. There's another January 1ster right there. It was in the news in Rochester. So doesn't make any sense. It's just a lot of coincidences that everybody in Somalia is born on January 1st. How did that work out?
If you look at the Refugee Resettlement Program, and let's say you go to the Hmongs, for example, they've been coming to Minnesota since 1975, the United States. They don't have 0101 that I know of on any of their refugee status. This is primarily with the Islamic population, 0101. So if you look at most of the refugees that we bring into the United States, they pretty much know when their birth dates are. But in this situation, it becomes a quasi government. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
let's just take them for their word, and hopefully at their birthday, this guy's at 25 years old and he's still going to high school and he's 11th grade. He looks like he's a high school kid, but we don't know
Yeah.
when he was born. So just let him a 25-year-old kid go to high school, or maybe we
Right.
should subsidize him for college or different grant programs, or letting them under $80,000 of household income in the state of Minnesota, you get your college education for free. We just don't know. There's too many questions that are risen in the air, but you don't see this with other populations, with
No.
the
No.
Hmongs and the Korans, and all those that are brought here.
There's cases where they changed their birthdays as well. And there's cases where they even forged death certificates in order to um, remarry. So they'd go back to that was other cases that were found recently. And I mean, when you read through the DOJ documents, it's shocking the the creativity and the boldness to just write anything down on a document. I know the explanation that used to be given is that 0101 is the default setting on a State Department computer. So if the Somali didn't know what day they were born, the State Department people would just leave it blank. That was the standard explanation that used to be given. But, if they had put something in there, then they're committing fraud. But just by leaving it blank, the employee can say, well, they didn't know when they were born. So I just kind of complied with, leaving it 0101 because I wasn't given a birthday. But that right there tells you, I mean, that's an innocent explanation, but it goes to show you that these people are coming from a nation where they don't have any paper documents to really substantiate, you know, who is who and what is what. Not a lot of Minnesotans understand that Somalia has 5 tribes, and now these tribes' cultures are playing out in Minnesota politics and just determined the mayor of our largest city in Minnesota, and will probably determine the governor of Minnesota because already the GOP is bending over backwards to accommodate Somalis, and there's Somalis from other countries that are interfering in Minnesota or getting involved, I guess is a less dramatic word, but there's Somalis in other countries that have an interest now in Minnesota politics because of the ascension of these extant Somali tribes, the 2 main tribes that are powerful in Minnesota. So there's other groups competing and vying for the attention of Minnesota politics. So the tribal warfare from Somalia, what I'm trying to, you see what I'm getting at? So that even though they're not here, tribal warfare from Somalia is leaking over into Minnesota, and it's influencing Minnesota politics. And I just don't think as Americans we should be wasting our time dealing with the tribalism from Africa, because when they get on stage and they use their language and they don't want to be mistranslated, right? But they should be speaking in English then at a political rally, but they're going to speak in code. And Ron, why don't you give us some thoughts about the fraud as it came into being from the very inception? Like, what are the first incidents of fraud that you think were like that bubbled up to the surface? I have a couple of anecdotal stories relating to Rochester that bubbled up. Um, I can share those, but back to you. I would just say before you start, it's always easier, like P.T. Barnum said, it's easier to cheat a man than it is to convince him that he's been cheated. Maybe that's what we're dealing with some Minnesotans. They don't want to accept that they've been cheated, so they have to pretend that they're surprised. But I think for a lot of other Minnesotans, they know that this fraud was going on, and it's going to touch on the financial sector, the banking sector. You mentioned the Halawa system. Try to say something about maybe the banking industry, because there's got to be some really sophisticated way that they got millions of dollars out of Minnesota without it flagging something at the United States Department of Commerce. The Commerce Department would notice if you or I took anything over $10,000 out of the United States. we would be it would be seized at the port of departure or entry. And please say something about that. I need to plug in this extension cord because it's not charging my camera. Okay. So you talk to yourself for a minute. Okay. Go ahead, Ron. Go ahead.
So first off, you're mentioning the Hawala program. Hawala means remittance. Remittance is the amount of money that you get here in the United States, and you send it back to your homeland, wherever your family is, to support them. When you take that out of our system, you are then choking our system from its basic needs of fire departments, police departments, roads, schools, and whatnot. The remittance program is probably the most important part of the scam that we're seeing. And remittance back in 2003, the worldwide remittance program, just for the United States being sent over to other countries, or the world, I should say, all the world was $111 billion in 2003. Now that's money being sent out of developed countries into developing countries. $111 million. By 2017, it went up into over 500 million. Now it's nearing 800 billion. Now it's nearing $800 billion of remittance that's leaving developed countries and going to developing countries. So this isn't just the United States sending money out to Somalia, South America, North America, Mexico. This is money that's leaving all developed countries like Germany, France, Switzerland, and all the developed countries. This is a redistribution of wealth. When Obama started this, he said we are going to redistribute the wealth. And he wasn't talking about taking from the rich and giving to the poor here in the United States. He was talking about taking from the developing countries and giving it to the developed countries so we could work off this United Nations Sustainable Development Program that everybody, they could end poverty. So this was all part of a process that was taking place worldwide. But what people do not understand, this all happened in 2015 at the Paris Climate Agreement. In 2016, Donald Trump became president of the United States. And when he became president, he said, we are not going to enter into this agreement, even though Germany was being flooded by millions of Turks. France, Italy were all being plummeted with refugees from Muslim countries. England was being plummeted, but the United States under Donald Trump says, no, we're not going to do this. And he walked away from the Paris Climate Agreement and watched the remittance program then drop down, and we kept the money here. In 2020, Biden became in office. He opened up the Paris Climate Agreement, and that's when you've seen that flood of money leaving. And he was asking for $3.5 trillion in stimulus programs. He asked for many different stimulus, and each one of those had to do not with the United States. It had to do with sending money overseas to the developing countries. And so they needed to soften the blow of what Trump did for four years. They needed to say, okay, we need to make up the difference of what we didn't give to the world. And they had to dump all that money in under Biden. And in return, Biden had to open up the borders and bring in millions, 12 to 20 million people into the country to make up what we did, what the United Nations lost in the last 4 years between 2016 and 2020. So understand that this was all designed. This was made up through the remittance program, the resettled people, the redistribution of wealth under Obama. This was all designed under the Paris Climate Agreement. This isn't something new. This fraud that we're hearing about isn't something new. We've been warning you about this for years. You're not hearing it for your first time. Many of you just didn't want to listen that it would never happen here, but it did. And now you got to figure out why your homeowners' taxes are going up through the roof, because you didn't pay attention the first time we told you. And now it's going to happen again, and we want to warn you. Paul Revere is here. We're on our horses. We're coming to you. And then we can't tell you anymore because that horse is just about, it's running out of water right now. And you better figure it out or they're going to come back because the remittance program is going to kill the United States. Because we cannot let 20 million people come in here, become asylum seekers, put them on the Social Security benefit, welfare benefits, and all the other means tested out there and hope that we're going to survive this. You cannot survive this. People can't survive this.
I'm sorry, but you just mentioned a big part of it right there is that the Biden administration, they were just passing out the Social Security numbers. Talk on that a little bit more deeply. I don't know if that, I'm not sure everybody really realizes that the Biden administration was just passing out the numbers. And a lot of those, I think several 100,000 have been nullified, but they signed up all these individuals and gave them the same rights as here in Minnesota, you had the Walz administration giving people's driver's licenses, and then that allowed them to get, of course, with their Social Security number, they're allowed access to all of the rights and privileges that regular citizens have. But of course, with the remittances program, money's leaving our economy. And like you say, our property taxes keep going up. People are noticing that the roads and bridges are not in good repair and wondering why our highways are in the condition they're in, and basic infrastructure is not looking real good, and the schools don't have enough money, and gee, people don't have good health care, really don't, and their insurance premiums are going up, and some people are driving around without insurance, and rules don't apply to everybody. And so what about those Social Security numbers and that special program of just putting people like catch and release into the United States? That when Trump says he's not catching and releasing, that's really significant there, right?
Well, so you brought up several different subjects there. We gotta narrow it down because there's too many subjects. First off, the very people that are supporting this immigrant influx into this country, the very
don't call them immigrants,
whatever you want to call these these people who have trespassed across our sovereign land.
Right.
They changed the rules and the guidelines of the administration, the Biden administration. They allowed them to be asylum seekers, not refugees. Asylum seekers has rules, and those rules are you must go to the next neighboring country before you could ever come to the United States. They didn't do that. They came right directly to the United States. Now, why is that different from an illegal alien, if you want to say? Well, an asylum seeker kind of falls under the umbrella of a refugee, which means they are a temporary protective status, and they can come in under the guidelines, under the line, if you want to say, and they can apply for many of the social benefits. An illegal alien cannot do that. Cannot do that. An illegal alien, if you get charged with a fine under the guidelines of being an illegal alien, you can be deported ASAP out of the country. Under an asylum seeker, you have to go through a whole process as though you are a citizen, and you are under international law, and you are protected like a refugee. So there's two classes of law here. You have United States constitutional law, along with United Nations temporary protection status. So you've got two statuses, two laws that are protecting you. And we always think, well, because you're here as a citizen, you're protected under the Constitution. No, they're protected under United Nations refugee resettlement law, and they're binded, so they're very difficult to get out of the country once they fall under their status. And that's why when the Biden administration brought them in, he put them under temporary protection status under asylum seekers and not here illegally, so he could fast track them into the system and then therefore send that remittance out to the rest of the world, and by depleting the economy here in the United States. Now, we have to look at this from another avenue. We looked at as who's protecting these people. Well, that's interesting because the very people, the 10 voluntary agencies, most of those that contract with the United States government work as contractors under a religious umbrella. The Lutheran Social Services works under LEARS. the Catholic bishops, the Catholic charities works under the Catholic bishops, all these 501c3s. Interesting enough, these 501c3s don't pay any taxes, so they're not affected by it. Churches are not affected in any way by the status of an illegal immigrant or an immigrant or a refugee because they don't pay any taxes. So it does not affect the church, but it affects you. It affects you as an individual who own a home, own a business, own you pay for the taxes, your roads, highways, police departments, and school. It affects you in every way. But your churches who support these programs are the ones who I feel are more detrimental to the United States Constitution than the refugee or the immigrant itself. Blame it on the churches because that's where this protective status of not paying taxes, that's where it lies. That's where your problem's at.
Ron, let's call these organizations out by name. The VOLOG, the main VOLOG in Minnesota that are major resettlement agencies and partners. The key organizations involved with this are the International Institute of Minnesota, Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota, Arrive Ministries, Karen Organization of Minnesota. Karen, that's a great name for it.
Yeah.
Catholic Charities, Minnesota Council of Churches, Refugees Services, Alight, formerly American Refugee Committee. They have to change their name. Intercultural Mutual Assistance Association. They have a lot of money. And Cairo, they call themselves Cairo, Council for American Islamic Relations. So that's another related agency.
Okay, so I need to clear this up for you because what you're saying, it's not defined. When I said there were 10 volunteer agencies that contract with the federal agency, the Homeland Security or Department of Homeland Security, those are not it. What you're describing, what you're describing is
partners
or subcontractors. There are 10 volunteer agencies that contract with the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department. Underneath them, there are 380 different subcontractors that below them. So when you're talking Lutheran Social Services, which you meant, right? They're under the guidelines of LAIRS, LAIRS, Lutheran Immigration Services. The Catholic Charities is under the Catholic bishops. That's one of the 9 or 10 volunteer agencies. Arrive Ministries, you mentioned, they're under World Relief. They're one of the 10. So what you're describing is the second tier or the partners or the subcontractors to the big boys that are making all the money. See?
These organizations have a responsibility to tell us how much money, and they have a responsibility to tell us what their plans are in our community, don't they? But they don't have any meetings with the community. They don't really have any quarterly meetings to tell us anything about.
That's not true. That's not true.
Aren't they supposed to tell us what they are up to?
Under the Refugee Resettlement Act, all agencies at the subcontractor level, Lutheran Social Services, for example, in St. Cloud, Minnesota, they do a quarterly meeting every quarter of the year. They send out and I've seen it, they send out a mass email to city councilmen, county commissioners, school board members, anybody that are what they call stakeholders. People who are going to be directly involved in the process of getting them to assimilate. They don't use the word assimilate, they use the word integrate. And to bring them into the country. Those are what they call, those are the lowest tiers of the subcontractors because you got 10 volunteer agencies, you got 380 subcontractors, and then it gets down to the local churches, and then you get, the local 501c3s. See, does this make sense? All these different layers that are involved, and we all look at the layers that are closer to us when in fact the big money makers are the big churches.
How much money are they making more or less like per head. I know one estimate was say $104,000 per head to bring
over a
in
lifetime.
over a lifetime.
And I don't
So
know what the exact is. That's sort of like now when they come to the United States, it's around $5,000 to $8,000 per head. Now remember, that's what leaders or the Catholic bishops are going to get per head. Once they send it down to the next tier, which is the volunteer, 380 volunteers, subcontractors below them, they will take their cut right off the top. They'll send it down to the next level so they can pay for their facilities and whatever, and then they drop it all the way down until they get to the local churches. Like Ride Ministries works with World Relief, or Lears works with Lutheran agencies. And once it gets down to the local level, there's no money left. They chewed it all off. They took it all off for administration fees. And when they get down to the bottom, everything is volunteer. We're going to get people from your church to voluntarily take them to the schools, to register them for schools, take them to hospitals, take them to the welfare programs, the Social Security office, teach them how to cook. They do this for 90 days. When this first started, it was up to 3 years, fully 100% paid for by the United States Department and United Nations. They've lost all their funding, and now they're down to 90 days. And after 90 days, they don't care what happens to these people. They kick them out on the street and they put them on the social welfare programs, and the county is then responsible to take care of all the refugees' needs. 90 days is all you get on federal funding, and it used to be 3 years.
so are we seeing these people going from town to town and state to state? It seems that when ICE was in Rochester recently, they arrested quite a number of Somali, and we were told that they were not from Rochester. They weren't from Minnesota. And that was supposedly an explanation. In my mind, that raised the issue, well, what were they doing in Minnesota? Was this a place that they thought of as a safe haven? Like, hey, let's run to Minnesota or let's spend our time in Minnesota if our benefits aren't working in another state right now, or uh, what were they doing here? A journalist would have asked those questions, but apparently that's not for the residents of Rochester to know or understand. And of course, with the issues of identifying these people, um, they don't, the good people of the churches don't want us to be asking those questions. We're just supposed to welcome the people in our community. They're just members. The people that are floating in our community are members of our community. We're supposed to welcome the stranger. So, you know, I,
Well, what they're doing here is this fraud that we're seeing now started long ago. It took the Trump administration to be able to investigate it and see the fraud for what it is. But this has been going on for a long time. They were fleecing Minnesota. They were taking the money out to a terrorist. You mentioned the word Cairo on your list there as one of the subcontractors. That's new, by the way. That's probably going to be under CARE, spelled the same way, and as a 501c3. And they're funneling money through all these different 501c3s, and it's a money laundering issue. That's what it is. This whole thing's money laundering, and they're sending it through the 501cs to be able to facilitate and launder money through Hawala, launder money through the DNC, and so on and so forth. And yeah, they know who these people are. They've known it for years.
it's interesting that finally came out that campaign donations were made to uh, many DFL politicians uh, by individuals who were convicted in the Feeding Our Future fraud by the United States Department of Justice. So again, it took forces from outside Minnesota working through their local district office to finally bring the cases, do the investigating, and do the prosecuting of Minnesota fraudsters because, well, I can't say because, but the politicians claim they've returned the donations, but we know, for example, Congressman Ilhan Omar is linked to the Safari restaurant where she held her campaign events, and she was a good buddy of the owner of the Safari restaurant that was involved in the Feeding Our Future fraud, and um, all of these gifts in kind and various political activities, and there's a whole lot of problems around Ilhan Omar and her third husband, the white boy, and that the white boy third husband is going to be a huge problem with the businesses. That stuff is going to come down as well. But I mean, just kind of wait for it, because um, that I wouldn't even try to talk about, because it's really complicated. It involves, again, money laundering and several different companies, and how Ilhan Omar suddenly went to having $30 million from being 65,000 in debt, yeah, by being a congresswoman is
Mhm.
anybody's guess, right?
Yeah, I doubt if you'll ever see Ilhan Omar go down for anything. I personally think this is only a personal assumption. I believe that she's protected by the Republican Party. I believe they don't want her to leave, not because they need her, because she's more of an asset to the Republican Party. She shoots her mouth off too much. She spoils the apple cart. She doesn't really show up to vote when she's supposed to vote. She's dumb as a box of rocks. And they believe that she's probably more of a detriment and more of an asset to the Republican Party. For example, if you really want to look at this, why hasn't Tom Emmer done anything? He's talked about her for several years, but Tom Emmer, part of his voting bloc in the 6th district, comes right out of the Somali population. When Trump came to Minnesota, I was standing right there at the St. Cloud State University, right there, as his handlers came out and chose 5 to 6 Somali guys out of the crowd if they would sit behind Donald Trump and they got to sit right behind him as representatives for the Somali population. They pulled them right out of the crowd. And that was Tom Emmer's doing. And then on top of that, in 2015, Tom Emmer creates the Somali caucus with Keith Ellison, who was taking money through the remittance program, and they thought they could level out the war-torn country and make it more civilized out of Minnesota. And they were going to take the
Yeah.
remittance program from 15% down to 5%, which they did. And I interviewed Ellison, got that on tape. So here you got Tom Emmer involved with the Somali caucus, and he's washing his hands scot-free from this whole thing. And I believe he's got his hands so deep into this, and he's getting away with it.
There's a funny thing about Tom Emmer reforming himself and kind of going hardcore on immigration and talking tough and becoming Trump's guy, kind of the lead of the Republican legation in Minnesota. He did a real turnaround. Like, he found he could still win with the tough talk, but he was he was right there with the Somali caucus and the foreign remittances program and the Halawa set up. And I mean, apart from the money in the suitcases, though, doesn't there have to be an easier way to get money to East Africa out of Minnesota? I mean, with a click of a button. My thinking is that, okay, people who, apart from buying gift cards, and apart from buying um, money orders, which everybody has seen Somalis lining up. Everybody's been standing behind Somalis in a Walmart when they're buying money orders, or at a Quick Trip when they roll down the $100 bills and the cash and they're buying money orders. That experience, and then the cashiers um, are selling in different stores, different different chains, multiple money orders to the same individuals over and over again. In Rochester's case, it took a long, long time before these employees and the stores finally figured out that the same women were sending money orders to Somalia from Rochester, and it finally resulted in their arrest and investigation and prosecution for funding terrorism back in the Middle East and back in Africa. And in that case, it was, I believe, ISIL in the Levant. No, sorry, it was Al Shabaab. Al Shabaab. They were funding from Rochester, and there were churches in Rochester that were welcoming these ladies, and foolish, you know, Rochester churches were welcoming them and filling their baskets with cash because they were going to help the poor children back in Africa. And these two ladies went from church to church and gave their spiel. And of course, all the little old ladies of the churches they went to just poured their money into the baskets, Ron. They've had us so well trained since we were children to think of the poor starving children in Africa. And I'm fond of telling younger people the story of how, you might remember, Ron, when we were kids, they would hand out those little uh, paper collection boxes at church or at school for UNICEF. And they would have us assemble those little boxes, and they had us kids. UNICEF had us children in Minnesota walking door to door begging for UNICEF, and we would collect nickels, pennies, dimes from our neighbors to send those little boxes of UNICEF money to God knows where. And now you find out that UNICEF always was a ripoff. There, it was always people skimming off the top.
Well, I think you're correct on that. When we look at the 501c3s, when Trump got into office, he stopped the funding for 501c3s and the refugee program. So what happened? Luther Social Services started laying people off. They started closing offices all across the United States. They couldn't. Well, um, Wes, wasn't this supposed to be humanitarian? Go to your
Right.
churches, collect the money. No, once they shut the funding off from the federal government, suddenly it's like, okay, the faucet's off now. The stuff that they got from the churches, that was just spending cash for them to go to the grocery store. You know what I mean? So now
Right.
it's like, okay, yeah, we suckered everybody into this. And what happened to all those signs that were love thy neighbor? All those signs, while
Yeah.
they were being funded by the federal government, suddenly, oh, we love our neighbor. Yes, don't have those signs. No more signs. It's
Yeah.
like, really?
Yeah.
What about charity for helping them out?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have the money to do that anymore. We have to use taxpayer dollar money.
Yeah, we have to use other people's money, and a lot of us were straight up saying we can't afford your compassion. We can't afford your generosity. And actually, I could be more compassionate and generous with my own money if you'd allow me to keep some of my own money. I remember there was a speech by, I think, Davy Crockett when he was a congressman in Washington, and he said something to that effect that you can't take money away from people. It's not yours to give. And now we're seeing that Minnesota's at a crisis. We're at a tipping point, and I always knew we would reach this point. It was just a matter of kind of getting it over to the top to that tipping point. But people have lost faith in their government. It's become an ungovernable situation, and they did it to themselves, and it results in what, 100 mayors writing this massive letter to Tim Walz saying, you have made the state ungovernable. Our municipalities are suffering. We don't have enough money to deal with our people, and we shouldn't be funding all this fraud. And all of us on the conservative side were always saying we want to fund programs for our people, but we see that fraud happening. And we know, Ron, this has been happening for years and years, and we were sounding the alarm. How many times did you speak in Rochester on this very topic? How many times were you down here? 10 times? I know we still have the videos posted. We still have the videos posted of probably at least six or seven of your visits to Rochester posted online where you're talking about the refugee resettlement program and and what it means and this money and the vologs and how much and all the 501c3s and the 501c4s and you're talking all about it endlessly and the cash moving around and
It's shocking because I hear very little from anybody, and I've talked to thousands of people who travel in the state, sounding the alarm for the last 10, 11, 12 years. And it's like, they're all like, geez, I didn't know it was that much fraud. I mean, I think I'm more shocked of the ignorance of somebody would show up, listen to a 2 to 3 hour presentation, get fully educated on volunteer agencies and how the program actually works. And they'll walk away saying, geez, I never knew 10 years later. I never heard of this before. And then still supporting Tim Walz as a governor. That I think if Tim Walz still ran today, I wouldn't doubt if he probably would not win again in the state of Minnesota. People are that blind.
I think he may actually, if he gets through emotionally, because he seems to be coming unhinged, he's coming apart at the seams, um, just looking at him. But if he gets through it uh, mentally and emotionally, he could very well win. He's bound to be the front runner
Mm-hmm.
because the Republicans can be relied upon to form up a circular firing squad and start stabbing each other in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And, as if on cue, whomever becomes the front runner amongst the Republicans will have a certain segment of the Bush Cheney Republican traditionalists walking away as spoilers because they won't want to help because they didn't get their Mitt Romney candidate to be
Right.
the front runner, or that segment of sorry but baby boomers that didn't get their you know kind of milk toast more purple. Sorry, but to paint a broad picture, there's going to be dissatisfaction in the ranks because there's so many candidates running right now. And then the establishment people that jumped in because they didn't want Phil Parrish to be the front runner. Robbins is a great representative. Just stay in the House of Representatives. Be a great representative. She's an awesome representative. Her work on the fraud committee is fantastic. I love Representative Robbins, but she wants to suddenly run for governor because Bill Parrish is in there. And then Speaker Damuth needs to run because one establishment person wasn't enough. So now you have two establishment people running, and then of course Mike Lindell jumps in there, and I think he's great, but other people think he has negatives. But I noticed statistically he goes right to the top of the pile in terms of being the most electable. But I didn't want to talk about candidates. I wanted but all of those guys have winning issues. I think what we're getting at is like this race is theirs to lose, right? It's a winning situation. But Tim Walz could pull this off because the Democrats are disciplined.
Yes, they vote as a block. They tell them how to vote. They're very easily swayed. They tell them how to vote. Republicans are in an infighting mode constantly. And if you don't think that Tim Walz could win again, all you have to do is look at the mayor race in Minneapolis and watch Fry against Omar Fatah. And then that'll
Bingo.
give you an private. You can look at New York and look at the Mandani who just won there. Their network and how they work and how they sway people. Yes, I believe that Tim Walz has a very good chance of winning because the Republican Party will not unite. They're controlled by Tom Emmer. Tom Emmer tells them how to vote, and I still say he supports Omar. And I don't like what he did to Donald Trump at the end of the 2020 election. He did not support him. And we know that he is supporting, from what I hear, that he's supporting Kendall Qualls. And I find that to be alarming all by itself. If you look at all the people in Minnesota right now that we are having problems with, they have been imported in here. Omar, Ellison, Walls, all from different states, different countries. Noor, Omar Fatah, we could continue this whole list. They've all been drop shipped into Minnesota. And Walls, he's from Nebraska, I believe. So now you've got a guy that's coming in from the Republican Party, named of Kendall Qualls. He's from the poorest part of the United States in the lowest poverty area of, I think it's Queens or somewhere in New York. And they want to drop ship this guy into Minnesota with a foundation, by the way, which I don't like foundations,
Yes.
with a foundation sitting on his back with no credentials, and they want to make him, and Waltz is supporting him as the next possibly elected person to the governorship of Minnesota. If you don't see that alarming, that bell alarming with the history of how they drop ship people in here, then the state of Minnesota is truly hidden their heads, and they're like an ostrich. They're not going to poke it up, and that's why I think Walz could win this election. And if he doesn't, they're going to put guys like Kendall Quall up there, and we're going to lose either way. One way or another, we're going to lose.
This is a colonization technique. It reminds me of the way that, say, the Roman Empire would treat a far-flung colony like Tunis or Algeria, right? You'd dispatch some governors out to manage the far-flung colony. All of these successful people that are sent out here, whether it's Norm Coleman or Al Franken, all these Minnesota politicians, someone has put together a list, and it's many politicians that are just parachuted into Minnesota. But the guy I ran against is from Hollywood, California. And he grew up, he's Mr. Disneyland. His creditors that, started him here in Rochester. And then he went bankrupt. So I guess Disney didn't care that he went bankrupt, but they got no problem with that. They got money to burn. They got him elected.
Out of St. Cloud. Eric Putnam's out of Berkeley, California. Again, there's another, his wife runs the school district in St. Cloud, who's the lowest in the state in the educational system. So we've got two radicals from California that come in here. They're drop shipped in here. You've got a superintendent in Rochester that was drop shipped in here.
Yeah.
Has no credentials whatsoever. He gets dropped in as a superintendent. I mean, it's happening all throughout Minnesota. We're seeing drop.
And then we're told that we're supposed to welcome the stranger.
Right.
And then they tell us not to play nativist games. We're not supposed to care what someone's credentialing is about. But Dr. Kent Peckel really didn't have experience in the education field. I mean, for
he was a superintendent for Rochester.
He jumps right to a superintendency from he had a short stint as a teacher, but he was a Yale guy. And Omar Fetta is a Yale graduate also. It's a little known fact.
I didn't know that.
But there's some strange coincidences about Yale. Let's not get into that. But all of this stuff that's put on Minnesota, and we're not supposed to notice, and then we're supposed to quickly forget if we do notice. But all of our value that gets squeezed out of us and sent overseas to build mansions on the Mediterranean or to fund terrorist fighters or civil wars in far-flung countries. And then we're expected to send our farm boys over to fight in the Ukraine. I say no. I say Minnesota first and America first, and keep the boys home. I don't want to see any of our guys bleed out in any more foreign wars while they get replaced by the people that they went over and bombed. It doesn't make any sense to bring people here who hate us. And
let's make this point even more clear, because I want to bring this home before we end. You're wearing a shirt that looks like the Minnesota state flag,
Yes,
right?
it is. Yeah.
So there's another prime example of drop shipping people in, changing our culture, changing our flags, having called to prayers in Minneapolis and many other cities, and they're changing our whole identity to fit their narrative. We're being overrun, and I think we ought to end on that. We need to end up with you
Yes.
people wake the hell up because we've been here. Don't act like you don't know because you knew. We told you. I told you. Many of us came in here and told you. You didn't want to hear it. I don't mean to be harsh, but the truth is you were warned. Paul Revere warned you. And right now, that horse is getting his legs cut off right now. And we, so
Yeah.
finish it up and we'll end this because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Don't get upset, Ron. You're correct. You told us all about it. Ron, there in the next video I do with you, I'd like to talk a little bit about the truth that you were telling all those years ago, and we'll keep that a surprise. But I'll tell you what after we get off the recording, I'll tell you what I have in mind for that. But we'll keep that for the next one. And yes, they're telling us that this flag is racist, although um, they've never shown that any of the tribal elders ever had a problem with this flag. What they do have a problem with in the the elders don't understand how the Indian is no longer represented on the flag of Minnesota. And so this flag represented the culture of our people and the traditions of this land, settlers and Indians, and finding a way to live together. And they even say we're not supposed to use the word Indian. So I, you know, cultural Marxism is on the march all the time. But Ron, you told everyone you traveled all around this region and you did multiple speaking engagements. Everyone remembers your dedication to being a Paul Revere. You talked endlessly about the fraud, waste, and abuse. You told us all about what was happening in our government. And kudos to you. They just let these people come in. And I'm reminded of like the Paul Revere metaphor. I mean, they're quartering the troops in our homes, and we didn't even talk about the fraud where they're buying up houses, leaving them empty, and they're taking money on empty houses, pretending that they're doing home services, and they're defrauding the state of Minnesota for empty houses that sit unused, and homeless people aren't even getting the services that they claim they're signing people up for health and human services, the emergency housing programs, and the Somali fraudsters are just taking that money and running. So, and we're not supposed to notice, otherwise they were calling us racist. That's Amy Bach, by the way, was exposed. Last thing I'll say, Amy Bach was exposed. Tactically, she deployed the word racist, Islamophobic, and so forth. She told everybody, go out and call all these people racists. If anybody questions what we're doing with the Feeding Our Future, just call them all racists. And I remember back when I was doing videos and during COVID, I was doing videos about the Feeding Our Future fraud with Bob Carrillo, and he had a whistleblower even at that time, for instance, and we were talking about it then. But anybody who questioned the Feeding Our Future program was called a racist. So,
not surprising. So, welcome to
well,
America, Minnesota. Great. And we all say you were warned. Now it's here. How are you going to deal with it? Think about that. How are you going to deal with it now? High taxes, EBT cards being spent on all your money. Your educational system is in the tank. You have racial wars going on. You have tribal wars going on in your school systems. And when we shut this faucet off, let's say we shut the faucet off to all the fraud. How do you handle the dog that came to your door that you fed for years, and suddenly you take his bone away from him and his dog dish away from him? What's that dog going to do? Dog's going to bite you, isn't he? Because we're going to have to shut the faucet off. Are you prepared for the dog to come back and bite you? Because that's what's happening. It may not be a metaphor you don't. It may be a metaphor you don't like, but the fact is, how are you going to handle that when you shut all the entitlement programs down, and now you have people who haven't worked for years wanting them to be served? Ask yourself that question. You know, figure it out, because now it's in your hands. We warned you.
Is that the title? We'll work out the title for this video, Ron. We had one.
Well,
We
we'll
warned
figure it
you.
out.
We tried to tell you, right?
We tried to tell you.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Ron.
Well, look at my website, catchingfirenews.com. I want to thank
Yeah.
you, Wes, for letting me entertain you for this evening. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. This is Christmas night. And you know what? You know, God always gave us a reason. He gave us a voice. He gave us, free choice. It's your choice to listen. It's your choice. And we just hope that you don't go on deaf ears, and let God lead you to the right light. So God bless, and have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Ron.
Take care. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.